Welcome to Brewing TV. I am Chip Walton. When we last saw our young hero, Jeremy King, he was in standard definition. Back in episode 4, the NB soldier and self-proclaimed yeast junkie taught us the ways of open fermentation, using this repurposed fish gutter as his fermentation vessel. Times have changed, and now King's living it up in high definition. He's also got a new plan for this experienced container. Warning, this episode of Brewing TV is for serious homebrew geeks, particularly all you yeast heads. You know who you are. Prepare to be kinged.
Welcome to Brewing TV. What you're looking at here is about to be used as a Coolship. I'm Jeremy King. I'll be your host for this episode. Cobras scare me, and I really don't like talking to big nerds, so Dawson won't be here today. Allow me to take you along a pretty fun ride of a brew day at my house. We're currently in the garage heating up some water. We're gonna make a nice little beer here around 5.5% roughly, and we're going to end up dumping the hot wort into this Coolship, leaving it overnight open to the air, and overnight it'll cool. In the morning we'll get it into some closed containers, and whatever got into it from the air overnight is going to ferment it. We'll see where we end up. This is part of a series of searching for wild yeast. Last September or so, Russ Klish from Lakefront Brewery had approached me about a project working with one of the beers that they produce called Local Acre. What they do is they make a beer that's using locally grown barley, locally grown hops. The next step in the process to make it completely local is to get a yeast that's indigenous to the state of Wisconsin. He asked me if I could do this, and I said, sure. I've done a number of things so far, including pulling some yeast off of some Wisconsin-grown barley. I've also harvested some out of the air just by setting petri dishes into my backyard. In this case, we're going to make some wort, leave it out overnight, and see what gets into it. We here at Brewing TV have gotten a lot of requests for a yeast washing episode. This one ain't it. I'm not afraid to fail. I've done it many times. I'm sure I'll do it again. All right, we're in business. Today we're going to do a very simple single infusion mash. I'm going to be shooting for about 153 degrees. I typically do a condensed mash, only about 20 to 30 minutes. Typically what I'll do is start the mash and then start heating my sparge water. And essentially as soon as that sparge water is ready to go, I'll lauter and then start sparging. I find that I get complete conversion most of the time, and I'm not too worried about any efficiency here either, so I ain't scared. Even if I were, I ain't gonna let that stop me.
Kinged.
Today we're brewing only 5 gallons for the sake of time here. With this Coolship, if we only used about 5 gallons, we would lose a lot to evaporation, and then there's gonna be a large amount of sediment left, and so our yield is gonna be very low. What I did yesterday is actually brew 5 gallons of an extremely thick mash. The gravity is well over 1200, and we're gonna end up diluting that in the Coolship later on, so that it's approximately 10 gallons plus the 5 we're making today, so that we have 15 gallons sitting in this thing. What we're creating today is actually based on Orval. I've taken a grain bill very, very similar to it and just copied it. In the end here, we're gonna be using some wild yeast. Wild yeast tend to be very phenolic, and so I've gotta have some kind of beer that can handle that. Orval is one of those. This recipe for a 5-gallon batch is simply 10 pounds rather, of Belgian pale malt. There's 3/4 of a pound of Caribbean and a 1/4 pound of Special B. That's it. Boom. And we're mashing. And we're mashing. And we're mashing. Welcome to my homeland. Well, there's about 21 different fermentations going, I think. I've got an Imperial Stout, Cyril's Bender, Bourbon Barrel Porter over there. I've got a Creek, a Grand Cru Lambic, 2 beers sitting here with yeast, with the wild yeast that I harvested for Lakefront. Another Lambic with some apricot and peach in it. A Peace Coffee Stout Porter, a wheat beer with some Brett in it, a Brunello wine, a Barolo wine, raspberry port, a test batch of Lakefront's Bridge Burner, British bitter right here. 2 versions of a Oktoberfest. This carboy here is actually the original test brew using wild yeast that I harvested off of Wisconsin-grown barley. This started as about 6 kernels of barley and about 4 milliliters of wort that eventually got doubled and doubled and doubled over a long period of time to eventually reach an actual 5-gallon sort of portion. This is a few gallons remaining from it. By the smell of it, it's very sour. The initial culture had 3 different living organisms in it, 1 bacteria and 2 yeasts. Eventually, I killed off that bacteria because I was having a lot of fermentation problems. I couldn't get anything to ferment further than 3% alcohol, no matter what gravity I was doing. It was 3% would cut out. So using chlorine dioxide several times, I took out that bacteria and then pitched the 2 yeasts in conjunction with each other. So this here started at a gravity of 1020 and dropped down to about 1010 or so, roughly. So it's actually a drinkable sort of thing. It's hardly any percent alcohol, but it feels and tastes like beer. I sent a sample of the original culture to the guys at Y Yeast, and they cleaned it up and isolated the 2 yeasts individually. One of them tastes really horrible. They're both very phenolic, and one is just awful. One is actually quite pleasant, and so that is ready for commercial production. With our boys at Lakefront, they're going to try experimenting with it some, particularly with their local acre, to make a completely local beer. Like everything in that beer will be local. And to my knowledge, that's the first time that every single ingredient is 100% local. So it's kind of a neat thing to be a part of. I start to run off, typically into a bucket, mostly because I'm too lazy to get another vessel out here. I'm just gonna run off here, drain my water because I'm weak into a small portion here, and then start sparging. Oh, also I don't Vorloff ever, I'm adamantly against it.
What?
So, personally, I don't Vorloff. I've read in the books and talked to plenty of brewers that say it's essential. Personally, I don't think so, at least not as a home brewer. My concerns are not with having clear wort with a good hot break, good cold break. I'm gonna end up with clear wort. What we're talking about really is lipids. Vorloffing can pull some lipids out of the wort, which actually help with things like shelf stability. But as a home brewer, I'm not overly concerned about that. I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna eventually keg it or bottle it, and I'm gonna drink it. Pretty quickly, probably. My concern mostly has to do with yeast. Like, all of my brewing revolves around yeast. In order for yeast to replicate, they need lipids at hand. And so I want to get as many lipids into this beer as possible, even though I know that means that the shelf life of this beer is going to be decreased.
Kind.
You may have noticed a gigantic beast following me around. That there is Carl. He is responsible for a lot of the graphic work and catalog at Northern Brewer. So he does very fine work. Keep up a good job. And quit following me. Batch sparging.
Brewing TV.
That's how I test for conversion. I just kind of pinch at it a little bit, feel if it's slick and sticky.
The term is viscosity.
Are you a scientist, Carl? Are you a scientist? No.
No. I was in a printmaking shop for a while though.
Oh, so you know words.
I
Good.
know words.
So you see how this little bubble here is sort of soapy looking? There's almost a rainbow-like character to it. That is an indicator that your starch has converted into sugars. So this abbreviated mash, I'm not overly concerned because I can literally see that I have conversion. And like, I really have no idea how this beer is going to end up just because the yeast is going to be, it's going to be a mix of, fecal bacteria among other things that are just floating around in the air here. Like, we're probably going to end up with some dumpster yeast or something. I don't know. But like, I have no idea what this is going to end up in the end. So like, gravity is one of my lesser concerns. I just want some beer in there. So I'm just gonna drain that until it's dry and then boil. I'm about to do something very stupid. I'm going to try to sterilize this inside of my garage. I'm gonna do that using isopropyl alcohol. I'm gonna sprinkle a little in this thing and then light it on fire. I did this yesterday, so kids, don't try this at home. I'm a trained professional. This is just soot. And so like, if that were in the beer, it would just taste like char. So I don't really want that. 2 ounces of German Hallertau, everybody. This is fermented fish. Ooh. It sounds exactly like what it is.
This is some buffalo fish. It's a type of fish that's native into the Watertown area, and it's actually fermented, sliced. The premises was it's a real Y bone style fish, really difficult to eat. Usually people smoke it. It tastes really good, but I wanted to try to get away from having to pick through the bones. And pickling will generally soften the bones. And I thought if I could do a lacto fermentation, it would probably, hopefully, achieve the same result.
Good job.
Man. Don't be afraid to spit it out.
No,
You
it's
edit
good.
it.
It's good.
Look at that there, fish. I'd eat that.
Put it in a sealed fermenter. For 2 days it sat out, fermenting and gurgling. And now for the last about week, it's been inside of my inside of the refrigerator. It's actually really good.
You ready to do this? Yeah. Are you ready to do this? Let's do this. Oh, look at that. Beautiful. So this hot wort is just going to cool via surface cooling. The movement of the air through the garage overnight is going to cool this, hopefully down to somewhere in the 70s. Early morning, I'm going to drain this into some closed fermenters where I'm going to let them ferment with whatever in the air has inoculated them. Historically speaking, long ago, there weren't things like refrigeration and some of the technologies that we use nowadays to chill wort just didn't exist. Back in the old days, this was the only thing you could do. They would build sheds around large, very large open coolships like this and leave the windows cracked overnight, and that air movement would chill it down, and whatever was in the air would inoculate, and the thing would start to ferment. This was before they understood what germs were. There was no such thing as germ theory at the time, and all they knew is that if they let things sit out for a little while, they'd start to ferment. It was like magic. We're at about 110 degrees right now in the actual coolship, so we're coming from essentially boiling to about just over 100 degrees simply by this huge surface area. So it's quite large. This bucket feels a lot heavier than a normal 5-gallon batch of beer. This is, what I did here was actually a partial volume boil where I boiled 5 gallons at pretty much double the strength. So that thing won't even measure on a refractometer. It's essentially 10 gallons of beer packed into 5. It's also going to help drop temperature down. And then we're going to add another 5 gallons to bring it up to its entire volume. We'll see where we're at. So over the next 12, 18 hours, or however long this is going to sit here, we could get a lot of things getting into this. Not only bacteria and yeast that are on dust that might fall into this. We're probably going to get some flies. There's one flying around right now. They always harbor some sort of bacteria or yeast or other organism, probably some molds. As for the flavor of this beer, I'm not sure what's going to happen. It greatly depends on what actually gets in here. We may get some lactobacillus from us just talking over it, so it may be slightly sour. We may have some wild Brettanomyces floating around that might inoculate this. It's one of those things where you just don't know until you try it. So overnight, this beer has dropped down to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty ideal for what we're doing here. This has been sitting open overnight in my garage. We've got about 15 gallons of beer in here, and there's all kinds of stuff floating in here. There's little gnats and what have you. So what we're gonna do here is move this out of this container into some closed containers. What I don't want to do is leave this open for very long because there's a lot of bacteria and other strange things floating around in this air that I don't necessarily want dominating this beer. I want whatever yeast is in the air to take over, and the conditions of this beer is going to favor the growth of this yeast. So I'm going to bring this into some closed containers here, and then we'll close them up and let them do their thing. So I'm going into a 3-gallon carboy here because I want to be able to see when fermentation starts, and I want to be able to watch how the yeast behave or whatever is in this. I can smell a little bit of those late edition hops, but not much. It's pretty subtle. I'm mostly smelling malt. I think it's important to note that I have not skimped on sanitation. Like my buckets, my carboy, they've all been sanitized. We sanitized the container itself before using it. The point is that I don't want what's on my hands, my fingers, my nose, my mouth. I don't want that inoculating this beer. I want whatever's in this air. Bob Marley said, keep it clean, and everything will be all right. What I'm going to do is take a sample of our wort that has sat here overnight. I'm going to take it with us to Lakefront Brewery. We're going to borrow their lab equipment and see what we have in there. If there's a large enough population of yeast or bacteria, I should be able to see that. If I have a mix of bacteria and yeast, I should be able to see that as well. All right, we're here at Lakefront Brewery. I'm borrowing some of their lab equipment. I've brought along a sample of the beer that we brewed last night. What I'm gonna do is actually put it under the scope and look for yeast and see if I have anything decent. We'll see what we find. We've checked out our sample a little bit under the scope here, and we see what might be some yeast. It's not a very high population, they're very sparse, but we do see some regularly shaped, nice round items under that, which appear to be yeast. We'll find out in a couple days, I suppose. So this is what I didn't want. We left a small portion of our wort in this Coolship and have just left it open for several days. We're now at about 86 hours after brewing, and what I see and smell is awful. There's all kinds of mold in there. I can see some bugs floating in there, and we have this strange pellicle already formed over the liquid portion in this thing. That smells awful. It's like rotten bread or worse. Lucky for us, we pulled this off. We pulled out some wort about 12 hours after brewing. So it had just sat in the Coolship overnight, and then we dropped it into some closed containers. It took about 70 hours or so for signs of fermentation to start showing. We're now 86 hours in, and we're seeing a very active fermentation, a nice thick krauss in here. I'm gonna go ahead and open this and smell it. It's gonna be a little bit difficult because I'm smelling a lot of putridness from this open mess over here. What I had been smelling before fermentation started was mostly malt, and that was about it, and some sweetness. What I'm getting now is almost vegetal smell. It almost smells like mustard, really. I have not yet tasted this, and I'm not going to at this time. I would imagine that the flavor is very similar to its smell right now. Plus, it's very early in its fermentation, so I'm sure there's a lot of off flavors in there that the yeast eventually will clean up here. Even though this beer isn't smelling exactly the way that I would like it to, I'm not overly concerned about that. I'm not concerned about drinking this beer necessarily. The whole point of this was to capture some wild yeast indigenous to my own homeland. It's entirely possible to later take a sample of this and start plating out on some media, whether it be agar or in liquid wort, and start separating the individual organisms in here. I'm certain we've got bacteria. I'm certain we have several kinds of yeast. And we could probably select for an individual yeast strain, or perhaps two, maybe some mixed population, that actually turns out quite pleasant. So there's a lot of unknowns here, and it's gonna probably take some time to figure out if we have anything really usable here. But we'll definitely keep you posted on how this experiment progresses, and you'll probably see more about some of the strange things I'm doing with wild yeast in future Brewing TV episodes. Until then, All for brew, brew for all. Oh, now I gotta clean this. Oh, that's gross. That's gross.
All for brew and brew for all. Northern brewer, Minneapolis, St. Paul. All for brew and brew for all. Northern brewer, Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's right. All for brew and brew for all. Northern brewer, Minneapolis.
Hey Bob, do what you can to help me out with this fermentation. Good night, everybody.
Canned.